So one of these knock-on effects that we see is an unprecedented energy crisis. As you all know, we have been working very hard in the last month against the fallout of the on the energy markets, and we have made progress. We're cutting demand. We have seen now that we have been saving gas 15% of the overall demand in September. We have been filling our gas storages. We are now at 92%. We have been intensively diversifying away from Russia towards reliable suppliers. And one figure shows that by now the Russian share of imported pipeline gas is down to 9%. So more or less 2/3 of the Russian supply has been cut. And as you know, we have made possible for the member states to channel windfall profits on energy companies to vulnerable households and companies. Thanks to this common action, we have reached our first main goal, and that was to be better prepared to face this winter. And on this basis, we can now take further steps towards a real energy union. 2 weeks ago, before the informal summit, I wrote a letter to the leaders outlining the roadmap on the energy field that we have. This roadmap includes elements that we have already put in motion. For example, that we've said we will negotiate with our reliable suppliers, like, for example, Norway, about a price corridor. But we also have other issues in this roadmap that take more time to mature and have been intensively discussed in the last weeks in various energy councils or summits. And as a result, the College could adopt today another set of proposals. And Commissioner Simpson and Commissioner McGuinness will outline these exceptional and temporary measures in a moment. Let me focus on the overall logic. We know that we are strong when we act together. Therefore, the first emphasis is that we make joint purchasing in this proposal today operational. We know that Europe's energy demand is very large, so it is logical that instead of outbidding each other, the member states and the energy companies should leverage their joint purchasing power. And for that, we propose today legal tools for pooling energy demand at European level. What we're doing, we're also enabling energy companies to set up a gas purchase consortium so that they are together able to purchase gas. And in that, we include one mandatory, one binding element. That is that we say the aggregation of demand will be mandatory for at least 15% of the volumes that are needed to fill the storage. Why that? Because we have seen by experience this year that it is the last 10 to 20% when we fill the storages that are the most expensive. These are typically volumes that are not secured by long-term contracts. And this year we saw our companies outbidding each other on these volumes in the spot market and thus themselves driving the prices up. Therefore, we want to be better prepared for the next filling season, that we want to join forces and pool this European purchasing power. Very important in that, we will, of course, also involve our close neighbours like the Western Balkan or the Eastern Partnership. The second element is saving. We have been speaking a lot about it. As I said, a lot has been done in the energy savings and energy efficiency, and it's a good sign that we now have a minus of 15% of demand that we achieved in September. The third element is solidarity, sharing. This is crucial to be prepared in case of a full gas and electricity disruption. As you know, we have the European Security of Supply Regulation. This is in force in 5 years already. It requires member states to conclude solidarity agreements with their neighbours in a certain region. Potentially, we should have 40 of these solidarity agreements. We have only 6. And this is not enough in a crisis of this scope. So with this proposal today, under 122, we are proposing default rules on solidarity that will apply in case of emergency as long as there are no bilateral solidarity agreements in place. We all know that European solidarity is the very best insurance policy member states can have in a crisis. But there's also a second element. The better we are organized, the better we can make use of all the work of the last month in interconnectors, in infrastructure, in LNG terminals or in the storage. It is also a matter of being well organized among us 27. So these were the first 3 points on pooling, sharing and saving. Now let me look at a fourth element that is about prices. We need to tame the volatility and the extreme price hikes on the main European gas market, that is the so-called TTF. The TTF benchmark has been mainly designed for pipeline gas. But we all know that this market has dramatically changed. It has changed from pipeline initially to much more LNG by now. So the TTF that we see today is no more really reflecting the true market situation. And therefore, we will develop a complementary LNG-specific benchmark for the next filling season. We have to bridge the time in between TTF now and the complementary benchmark we will have for the next filling season. And therefore, we are putting in place a mechanism to limit excessive gas prices if needed. Here you might perhaps recall that we had in March a communication where we were already proposing such a capping mechanism. But at that time, the proposal was not mature. We couldn't find majorities, but we have had a lot of discussions on that in the past month. So there is an increased understanding now between the member states, and our approach is much more widely shared. I'm therefore hopeful that we can now progress on these very critical issues. Here, today, we're taking a 2-step approach. Today, we're setting out a number of principles for this flexible or dynamic capping mechanism. It should be flexible enough to ensure security of supply, for example. It should be high enough that the market is functioning and the gas is flowing. And it should be wide enough that it is also covering the other benchmarks we have in the European Union. So as soon as the Council agrees on these principles, we will flesh it out, we will come with all the details in a not trivial approach to make it operational. Then there is a lot on intraday spike collar, but this, Marit, you will detail out. Very important, very technical, so this is your expertise is being asked. Now, finally, let me touch upon 2 important topics that are not in the 122. All I've said right now is in the 122. The 2 other topics are in the communication. The first one is how to limit the impact of gas prices on the electricity price. You know this model, it has been introduced in Spain and Portugal, where it has reduced electricity prices. So we believe that it merits to be considered for introduction at the EU level. And we are looking right now into the available data to find responses to 1 or 2 questions that are still open. But as I said, it merits really to look deep into it and to see how we can make it operational on the EU level. And my very last point is about investments. It's not so much the actual energy situation, but it is referring to the knock-on effects on impact on our economy because of the high energy prices. You know that we have introduced REPowerEU. Perhaps it's important to keep in mind that at the beginning of the war, when Putin started to weaponize gas, and this tactic was obvious for us, we decided to phase out completely of Russian gas. And at that time, when we had these discussions 8 months ago, you might remember that we were saying it will take us some years till 2027 or 2030 to manage that. Well, it went much, much faster, as you could see from the figures I was just presenting. So this process has been massively accelerated. If the current trend persists that we see, diversifying away from Russian gas, and if we keep up our action, also the saving action, we will have received at least 65 billion cubic meter of gas from other suppliers than Russia, and we will have saved 50 billion cubic meters of gas till the end of the year. That's quite a sum. And we see that we have this year a record deployment and delivery in the renewable energies. So taking all this into account, this acceleration in the transition that we see, I think we also need the same acceleration in our investment in the cross-border infrastructure and in energy efficiency and in renewables. And here comes Repower EU into play. We have proposed it in May. Since then, things have changed dramatically, as I've just described. And therefore, we will now carry out a needs assessment for Repower EU. We will assess what is necessary to boost this clean energy transition and how we can avoid fragmentation in the single market so that these investments in the clean energy transition are available all over in the European Union. This will then form the basis for Commission proposals to enhance the firepower of Repower EU. Tomorrow I present these proposals to the European Parliament and then on Thursday, Friday to the leaders. And with that, Eric, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, President, and I give the floor immediately to Commissioner Simpson.